Okay, looks like we're getting some attendees join. We've got Miffy and Palak, the first two ahead of 4:30. Okay, a few more. Nicholas, Liam, Rachel. Okay. For those joining, welcome, guys. We're going to give everyone a little bit of time to hopefully a few more to join. We got to 7 pretty quickly, and now no one else is joining. So let's wait another 10, 15 seconds. I guess, yeah, let's, seems it's a slow entry, but let's may as well start our hour, given we're probably not going to go over. So for those that joined, if you haven't joined before, so thank you. This is the 4th session in the series for this year. We did 3 sessions last week. This week, today we've got a webinar on law. Tomorrow banking, and on Thursday on the public sector. As with the previous sessions, please remember to use the Q&A section if you want to pose any questions. So type them in there, and the panel will address them appropriately. If you're having any kind of technical problems or any other sort of questions, comments, then feel free to type that into the chat, and I will look to address them. But okay, I'm excited to hand this over to Paul Almond, who will be moderating the session today. He's also a previous president of the Old Boys Union. So over to you, Paul, and hopefully we get a few more joiners.
For sure. Look, thank you very much, Max. Thanks for that little intro there. And we'll probably start nice and easy. Firstly, out of respect for the people that have already joined, thank you very much for coming on board and to meet us. And let's look forward to getting some of your mates and others to come on board and get some experience out of our experience. We four are all people who have studied law and in some shape or other are embarking or engaging in careers in law at all different stages. So I'm Paul Almond, and I'm from the class of 1982. I guess I'm the eldest statesman in this group, and I'm a lawyer practicing on my own account as Paul Almond Employment Law. Since 2014. But before that, I spent my career always working for big law firms. And so my career has been very much dominated by and shaped by that experience that big law firms offer, as opposed to so many other places that give you experience. And so hopefully when you guys that are watching this presentation today, you'll get a bit of a taste of the different sort of law careers that you can enjoy, and pathways which who knows where they might lead you to. So that's me, Paul Almond, class of 1982. Today we've also got, and I'll start with the youngest. That's Kushal Vesia. Lovely to have you here from the class of 2013.
Thanks, Paul.
Kushal studied at the University of New South Wales, like myself. He was at one of the big law firms as well, Baker and McKenzie, a big international firm. If you guys want to Google that and learn a little bit about who Baker and McKenzie are, a very interesting firm. Kushal is currently a solicitor at the University of Western Sydney Justice Clinic. So he's sort of moved on from big law and he's trying something different. So it'd be good to hear about that. He's also got some interesting activities he's involved in. He's COO of the Australia-India Film Council. And I should also say that while at University of New South Wales, he was very active in student life. So Kushal, what else do you want to add about who you are?
That's very, very kind of you, Paul. Very generous introduction. But no, look, it's nice to be back, albeit virtually, back at school, and talking to obviously people who might be interested in this space as well. I guess by way of background and adding a few more things is that in terms of that involvement at university, I was quite heavily involved in our UNSW Law Society, where we got involved in a lot of different portfolios, and that included things to do with careers, events, getting involved in figuring out different parts and different career paths that are available to students as well. So it's talk about that, and maybe it will come up a bit later, but it's just about kind of like school and kind of like Sydney Boys, it's university is another opportunity to really get involved in a lot of different things. And one of the things that really benefited me, from Friday night debating that happened at Sydney Boys to what happens at university, those are all really, really good experiences that come from there. And, law for me has been one of those careers that's let me have my finger in a lot of different pies, which has been really, really interesting. And the Film Council more recently is just a nice little addition, given I'm a bit of a Bollywood nut as well. So that's a nice little change or an addition in that sense. But, as I'm sure we'll learn from Tom, or obviously yourself, Paul, like it's one of those avenues where there's lots of different things to be able to get involved in, and the world really is your oyster. It's just a matter of kind of getting ahead of what can sometimes be an overwhelming amount of choice.
Fantastic. You're so right there. Tom, you're from the class of 2005, Tom Caldor, and Tom was also a solicitor at a very significant, but shall we say, new age law firm called Legal Vision. And we had a very diverse range of roles there, which I'm sure he'll mention about. And Tom was also an associate to a High Court judge, and obviously would have given him some great experience in the early stages of his career. And now, I don't know if it's fair for me to call you an entrepreneur, but you're certainly getting involved in something very new and very different, and your law experience is taking you into a whole new direction. So over to you, Tom. Just let the boys know a little bit about you.
Thanks, Paul, and great to be here and joining the conversation. So, like the two of you, I started pretty early career working in a big ivory tower firm, and as well, I spent a hot minute at Allen's, big corporate law firm in the city, as a consumer and competition lawyer. And unlike a lot of junior lawyers, I actually really loved working in corporate law. I thought it was great officers, really intelligent people, amazing clients doing interesting things. But I suppose for me, and I credit a bit of this to the Sydney High in my blood, is I don't think I was quite ready to look across the hallway at the partner and say, that's what I want to strap myself in for right now. I was keen to look at a few different things. I took a form of a breath by taking a year off to work, not a year off, but to work with a judge of the High Court. It was now the Chief Justice, which was a pretty cool experience, and finished that up and decided that I was brave enough to try something new, but not brave enough yet to leave the legal career that I'd been building, and came across Legal Vision, which, as you say, is a real innovator in the legal space, and started as a lawyer, but then moved into business roles. And that was where I got my taste of working, across the different functions within a business, which was a legal business. And somewhere along those 6 or 7 years that I spent at Legal Vision, I decided that was something that I wanted to build for myself, to have the experience of starting a business from day one. I was very early at Legal Vision, but I wasn't one of the founders who have done an amazing job to grow that business, and I wanted to see if I could test my mettle in doing that. And so about a year ago I started a business called Adjust, which definitely grows on my experience in Legal Vision and kind of the legal transformation and legal innovation space, but is not actually, strictly speaking, a legal business, but it is a business that's helping consumers resolve complaints with banks, telcos, and energy companies. So you can see that it's a kind of cousin of the legal world, but not strictly speaking a legal business, which I did disclose before the panel that I'm no longer, I guess, a practicing lawyer or even working within a strictly speaking legal business. But Max and the Old Boys Union assured me that my views might still be interesting to some of the boys attending today. So yeah, happy to be involved, and thanks for facilitating the discussion, Paul.
Yeah, look, Tom, and look, yeah, don't downplay it, because just because you're not practicing law, I mean, this is the pathway. We all know that the young adults of now are likely to have 2, 3, 4 or more careers throughout their working life, and who knows where it's going to take them, and you're an example of how that evolves. So fantastic stuff. Wayne, over to you from the class of 2003. So Wen also went to the University of New South Wales, at least for his undergraduate. Wen is a barrister, and again, just so that people are 100% clear, I'm a solicitor, Wen is a barrister. Generally speaking, barristers are the people that are standing up in court, although they do other things. Generally speaking, lawyers sit in the office and speak to the clients and get stuff ready, although they also do advocacy. So it's not a strict separation, but it's more about the separation of what they mostly often do. So Wen is a barrister, but before that he was with major law firms, including one very significant one, Gilbert and Tobin. And he practices in a couple of very interesting areas that you'll no doubt acquire knowledge of about when you research what you young boys in the audience who are trying to decide what to do and what subjects in the areas of intellectual property and also defamation. And of course, defamation, I'm sure that is something that does resound very well if you watch the news even for 1 minute a day. Wen, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Paul, thank you for that. To add to the description, I actually spent my first year at UTS and I transferred to UNSW. Before starting my legal career as a graduate, I did an internship in Hong Kong at a big law firm, which didn't work out, so I came back to Australia. I also had, I spent a long time in law firms before I came to the bar. I spent 7.5 years as a solicitor, and I'm happy to speak to that experience and why it took me so long to come to the bar. I'm also happy to speak about how I fell into intellectual property and why I began to practice defamation since coming to the bar.
Fantastic. Although, of course, you'll tell us about these things, but really not tell us about these things. There's so much of that, of course. As lawyers, so much of what we do is so confidential, and that is one of the very core ethical principles that we all have to work by. And it's something that's drummed into us all from very early teaching at university and law schools, and of course, even much more so when we start practicing. So if sometimes boys in the audience and your parents and the like, if you sometimes wondering what we're talking about, sometimes we can't tell you exactly, but we can at least speak generally to identify the type of work that we often do. So for example, I'm an employment lawyer, and one of the things that I've particularly done recently is I've been involved in, just don't know quite why, a number of employee fraud cases where employees have been working and effectively siphoned off money from the employer. The employer has come to me for advice about what to do. And obviously very interesting and very disturbing cases, and obviously too highly confidential and sensitive too. But we do some very, very interesting and a wide range of work as lawyers. Where I wanted to take us to, look, let's just have a little pause. Some of us would have studied the classics. I don't know if any of the boys out there watching study or have studied Latin and classical Greek. I certainly studied classical Greek at Sydney Boys. Did you guys on the panel, did anyone study Latin or Greek?
I did
Or
not.
when-
Year 12.
Year 12, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to test how useful it is. I'm just going to, I've got three, and whoever can answer first, just put up your hand. What does caveat emptor mean? I think Wen got up first.
Buyer beware.
Okay. Buyer beware is exactly right. And it's very common. It's buyer beware principle is very important in modern law because it was sort of the foundation of why we have a lot of consumer protection law now. Caveat emptor used to be whatever you buy, oh my God, you know, it's fallen apart. Too bad, there's nothing you can do. So we have consumer law which protects that. So that's a little bit about caveat emptor.
Can I just say that if Wen doesn't win this, I'm going to be particularly disappointed. You can't have a barrister not win the Latin round.
They only get slightly harder, and there's only two more. The next one, res ipsa loquitur. When again?
The thing speaks for itself.
Yes, that's right. So give us a very quick example. What does that? How does that is applied?
It's usually, I mean, we don't really use it in the law, but it's a proposition that's saying the thing is so self-evidently obvious, it speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's right. And finally, contra proferentum. Tom put his hand up on that one.
I was first on the first one as well, but I'm not gonna fight the rules here. I don't know the exact technical definition, something to do with against the person who provided it, perhaps, or against the originator. But it's
right.
a rule of contractual interpretation that says a clause. Well, these days it's usually ruled out by boilerplates at the end of contracts. It says a clause of the contract shouldn't be interpreted just because it was written by a particular party or another.
That's right. Of course, we do have one major exception, and that's in my area of law as an employment lawyer, with post-employment non-competes and restraints of trade. And if there's any ambiguity there, the court always applies the contra proferentum rule. And so if you wrote the contract and you mucked it up, or if you advised the client about that and you mucked it up, then the chances are the restraint of trade won't get enforced. You'll learn all about restraints of trade one day, Sydney High boys. That's our Latin quiz. Can I just take a brief pause and go to Max, our host? Max, how are we looking with numbers and any questions or chat going on at the moment?
There's no Q&A yet, so I guess the guys are waiting. But a reminder, please do pose questions in Q&A. Yeah, we've got the attendance is a little low, but I guess yeah, it is right today.
All right. Well, we've got a focused audience here, so that really means that with you guys that are watching and participating in this, you've got a chance to ask questions, and the chances are they'll get answered because you're not going to be competing too much. So please start posting up your questions. If something pikes your interest that you want to know about, or something you brought to this seminar that you really, really want to know about, perhaps we're the guys that can help you there. So what I want to move on to now, thanks for the Latin quiz, and I think Wen probably takes out the prize.
Tom's not happy.
Yeah, I think Tom might protest. So look, I want to just talk a little bit about Sydney Boys High life and its impact on your decision making and particularly the early stages of your career, but perhaps even longer than that. And maybe I'll start off with Wen, who left in 2003, the final flight of the Concorde plane, and you might want to Google that, boys in the audience, the Concorde supersonic passenger jet. Perhaps that didn't have a great influence on Wen in itself. And so if I can ask you, Wen, about what sort of influences and impacts, particularly your year 12 experience, but your Sydney High experience has had on starting off with the early choices that you made in your career, and perhaps what you've taken with you through your career from Sydney Boys.
Thanks, Paul. So I have to say it was 19 years ago, so memories, form and reform. But what I remember about how school affected my university choices was that, as a young, impressionable 17, 18-year-old, the most important thing in the world were the opinions of your friends. So that's why I think I ended up at UNSW, because a large majority of my cohort ended up at that university. And that was the reason why, even though I started my year at UTS, I then transferred to that university in my second year. The second point as to why I chose law, again, part of it had to do with the fact that I got the marks. A number of my friends decided to do law, and I thought, well, it sounds like a good idea. I always had an inkling of wanting to be a lawyer, although at 17, 18, I didn't quite know what that involved. So I guess those are the factors which influenced how school influenced my choice of university course.
Tom or Kushal, do you have anything you want to add about your Sydney High influence?
I had a couple of just thoughts, and similar to, I mean, somewhat similar, and some things different to what Wen was talking about. I think that for me, studying law was also, for one, with the public speaking and debating background, and a shout out to, I think, Rachel Powell, who's in the audience, who was deputy at Sydney Boys, but used to drive us to all the debates as well, and was a great influence. Thanks for attending. Hi, Rachel. But all, when you're doing public speaking, debating, and doing that sort of advocacy from time to time, there's always that stereotype. It's like, oh, you'll go into and do law, and as you're growing up and you don't necessarily know what else you might be doing, that was one of the big influential factors for me, that maybe this is something that I enjoy doing, because I enjoy those activities at a school level, or at a university level, and that sort of thing. I think more broadly, though, is that was one influential factor. I think one of the advantages, and what I sort of alluded to at the beginning of this panel as well, was that if you find yourself that you're reaching year 11 and 12 and you're not 100% sure what you want to do, that there are so many different options in terms of degrees and choices that you can make. I think one of the best decisions that I made for myself was trying to pursue that law degree, in the sense that whilst you might not end up necessarily practicing law, and Tom's a great example of someone that's practiced but also doing some different things now as well, is that there are actually a lot of different examples of people who don't end up necessarily practicing law in the way that you might see on TV, but it does equip you with these critical thinking skills, advocacy skills, and options that actually are really, really helpful for other areas of practice, where it might not be law, but it might be consulting, it might be media, it might be journalism. And they're all different things that so many lawyers and people who have studied law that I know have actually studied that degree and got that experience from, as a result of getting the confidence from doing that degree and the sort of skills that you get from a law degree. And so someone that's indecisive like me, quite often, law was a great option in that regard.
And so, Kushal, for some of those factors, did you draw on your experience at Sydney Boys as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of, so I didn't start Sydney Boys in year 7. I actually came in year 8, and I didn't know too much about the school. It was only thanks to my brother, who started a much later year at Sydney Boys as well. But he started telling me about the sorts of opportunities you get, whether it's public speaking, debating, sport, community service, whatever it may be. There's so many different things that you can get involved with. And I think if you're someone, and hopefully there's a lot of students in the audience that do enjoy this, is that if you enjoy the fact that Sydney Boys gives you a lot of different opportunities to be your full self, to get involved in a lot of different things, that was something that I wanted to channel later on in life as well, and tried to stay involved in a lot of different things. And that's not to say that, become a jack of all trades, master of none. But it is the idea that if you do enjoy having those sorts of choices, that sort of diversity and options, and using a broad skill set, you can actually do that with a law degree. And that's something that's, I really appreciate from school. and something that fortunately I've been able to, channel later on in life as well.
Yeah. And so, look, Tom, and just picking on some of perhaps of your high experiences and their influence, and maybe even if there's anything that you think that Sydney High could have done better, and that we can feed back. But you must have had a lot of influences that took you into particularly the early stages of your career.
Yeah, for sure. Should start by saying I feel like Kushal hit basically all the notes that I was keen to hit. So he stole my notes, or maybe I'm looking into some sort of time warp mirror of a much younger version of myself. But yeah, completely agree with the sentiments coming out in his answer. And for me, that was the big thing. And to link this a little bit to a question that's come up in the Q&A around how is it best to prepare for a law degree. My personal experience was I actually started in an arts degree, and that's because I was kind of like what Kushal was saying, but then on steroids. I actually still believe it's okay to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. I think there's a lot of space to contribute in the world with that type of a profile. Obviously, these days it's probably more correct to talk about the T profile, which is the breadth across the top of the T and then going deep in one particular area. But still believe that generalism is a real asset in a lot of contexts. And so for me, Sydney High was this kind of unstructured canvas to kind of involve yourself in all different fields, whether it is public speaking, debating, sport, academia, of course, community service, but even just cultural interaction in the playground. And so much of that that sort of unstructured learning but continuous learning led me to want to do a degree that was open and unstructured and a blank canvas for learning. And arts, or as it was called at the time, which was just trying to make it sound like a more illustrious version of arts, the degree I started, which was Arts Advanced, was the degree I chose. But I stepped into the first semester at Sydney Uni of Arts Advanced, and each lecture theatre had kind of 3,000-4,000 different new people in there, and I didn't feel any sense of sort of community and coherence and consistency. And so I started talking to some people about different options for me to transfer in the second year, and law kept being presented to me as sort of like a structured version of arts. And I know there's very different ways to interpret what a law degree is, but certainly for me, it was more that side of things, that it wasn't a professional degree, i.e. something that was going to make me then move into definitely being a lawyer, even though that's what I did for a short period of time. It was more that it was going to give me training in how to think, how to analyze, how to critique the world, or a particular important part of the power structures within the world. And so to answer the question in the chat or the Q&A about how to best prepare, certainly the amount that you will have to interact with in terms of reading materials, and the amount you'll have to do in terms of critical thought, and the two together, i.e. reading a material and then thinking about it critically, would probably be the biggest thing that you do. If you don't like doing that, and a law degree is probably not the right one for you. If you do like the idea of law, then getting a bit of practice at that type of thing through things like English and history at school are probably a sensible idea.
Thanks, Tom. And look, another question has come through, which probably best for either you or Kushal to answer, unless when, about thoughts on pursuing an alternative pathway to law, e.g. if marks aren't high enough to go via the top universities. Do you have any initial thoughts on that? Perhaps you, Kushal, would be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the one thing that I tell a lot of students, and particularly, you've got a high caliber of students that are coming from Sydney boys. There's, it's something that I think a lot of people get stressed about, that, see the ATAR for UNSW or USyd or ANU or wherever, and you're like, well, I might not be getting that even if you are the cream of the crop, right? The reality is that a lot of my friends who are very, very successful lawyers are not people that, scored the 99.95 ATARs to get into those universities. You have a lot of different transfer programs that are available across the board across many universities. So my experience at UNSW, for example, is that I had a lot of students, a lot of peers who did a first year degree in maybe arts or commerce or whatever they might like to have combined law with. They do the full year. And if they do a good enough job, if they can maintain some good marks in that degree, they're able to actually transfer later on in their second year and catch up and graduate at the same time as if they had started in first year as well. And that's a common thing that exists across a lot of different universities. Additionally, there's also the opportunity to study it as a postgrad, where you might do postgraduate law, which is I think a 3-year degree in most places. So ultimately, you're only really ever adding like 1 year. Like if it's 3 years for arts, 3 years for law, you're doing 6 years, perhaps instead of 5. In a career of 40, 50 years, 1 year here or there really doesn't make a difference at all. And like my advice there is that if you have a big enough passion and you really want to study law, you will be able to. I think one of the, especially looking at it from an international perspective, Australia is actually quite fortunate that there are a lot of different pathways into law. That's not necessarily the case everywhere overseas. So it is something that whilst in year 11 and 12, you might be feeling the pressure. I certainly did, about trying to make sure you get in the most convenient way with the ATAR. If you have a dream of becoming a lawyer, you will be able to become a lawyer so long as you, continue to put in the hard yards once you're at university, even if you don't start in law straight away.
Yeah.
Can I add, the ATAR cutoff for a combined law degree, which in my year was 99.3 at UNSW, is not, it's a function of supply and demand, and it's not a function of how intelligent or how hardworking you have to be to complete a law degree. Anybody who can get a decent ATAR will be able to complete a law degree if they put the effort into it. I'll share this in this forum. My sister did not go to a selective school. She went to a local school. She got an ATAR in her mid-80s. She didn't do law as a first degree. She did another degree. And then she did law as a graduate degree, as Kushal described. She's now working in corporate law in a big law firm overseas. I'm proud of her, but she didn't get a 99. And it just shows it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll definitely add to those comments. My own personal experience, as I said, I didn't want to do law coming out, but I wouldn't have had the marks. I would have just missed out. And then obviously went on to do exactly what Kushal described, transferred in. And I'll let you judge on whether I've come good on that transfer or not. But certainly it's a possibility. But even more so in my cohort, there's somewhat of a celebrity lawyer, a good friend of mine, Brian Wrench, who's one of Sydney's most known criminal defense lawyers. And he openly would say that he was not the most book smart guy back at high school. He was sporty and a great member of the friendship crew, but getting the top marks, he was far from the Ducks. To put it in a way that's respectful to Brian. He is, as I said, one of the most successful people in our friendship group, at least if you judge it on wearing beautiful suits on the nightly news every couple of weeks or so. But no, he does an amazing job in his field of law.
Yeah, look, well said about Brian. And for those of you, when we did the panel the last time, we actually had Brian speaking. And so if you want to go and listen and see what Brian had to say last year, then you can get that on our archive, and I'll make sure that Max circulates to you a link to last year's, or I think it was last year's seminar on the law. He's got some great stories too. All right, well, that's been great, and a nice little segue into perhaps talking a little bit more about university. Maybe where I'd like to start maybe is which university to choose. And I'm going to frame that this way. Just some research that I did of the top university law schools in the world. And I picked out of the top 100, I picked out all the Australian universities. Now, the top 3, the ones you would probably imagine: Harvard in America, Oxford was 2, and Cambridge with 3. And of course, you should certainly think about studying overseas, as so many of us have done. If you go through the universities in Australia in those rankings, the top university is the University of Melbourne, followed by UNSW, then University of Sydney, ANU, Monash University, University of Queensland, and UTS. So all of those universities featured in the top 100 law schools in the world, which I think is pretty amazing that Australia has got so much representation, and having three in particular in the top 20, I think is pretty amazing. But I guess what that doesn't help for our young aspiring lawyers and lawyer entrepreneurs at Sydney Boys High is how to choose the university. So perhaps maybe I'll start with you, Wen, because you actually had some experience with 2 different universities. And what we're trying to find out here is, what direction or assistance or questions and issues and criteria that a 17 or 18-year-old should be thinking about when choosing a university.
Sure. Firstly, if you're going to study a law program, the reputation of the law school. I mean, I studied at UNSW in Melbourne. I chose those law schools because they are good law schools. But that's not to say that any of the other Australian law schools are not good. I have friends who've graduated from those various other law schools in very successful legal careers. So any law school that you can get into, I would recommend, getting to the most reputable one you can. I would also take into account the reputation of the particular university in your other area. So, for example, if you're going to study science or technology or some other area, consider the reputation of the faculty in that other area. Thirdly, I would consider sort of, your commute and your lifestyle. If you're in far western Sydney, do you want to go to UNSW? I mean, I made that decision too, but that's not to say the commute was easy across those 5 years. It's an hour and a bit each way. So, all those factors together, it's a composite decision of all those things. And you can't make a wrong choice. At the end of the day, it's your personal decision. So it's not solely based on, is this the best law school that I can go to?
Tom, do you have any other factors that people might want to think about to choose a university?
Yeah. I feel I might always be the least useful view in these types of questions. I went to Sydney Uni because my older brother, who was 02 at Sydney High, and my older sister, who unsurprisingly was not at Sydney High, were already there. My sister lived in a cool share house, around the corner in Redfern. They looked like they were having a great time. When my parents said, is it going to be UNSW, which was actually closer to where I grew up, or Sydney Uni, I was like, well, obviously I'm going to go to Sydney Uni. But I do think that that's consistent with what Wen was saying there. I think there is a danger about being too focused on, the specific sort of course parameters of the degree you're choosing, and what might be in the international ratings, or a teacher that you've read about, without thinking about some of those other complex inputs. It's really interesting to hear Wen's point about commuting, something that someone who in my privileged position of being so close to both Sydney and USW didn't have to think about. And it genuinely would have been a significant impact on Wen through his time at uni. Thinking through those things is important when you realize that the caliber of universities in Australia is so high, and there are very strict parameters, dating back to the Priestley, what is it? Someone help me out. Priestley at 12, Priestley 11. Feels like such an odd number. Well, it is an odd number. But yeah, there's rules on what has to be taught at law school. So you're not going to kind of end up without the knowledge that you need. And so thinking about some of those other sort of pastoral questions and things like that. I think this links a little bit to another question I was seeing around, what's and Wen was touching on about the other course you might be doing, and someone asked what would be a good double degree with law. Again, I would be encouraging not to take too much of a what's the right word? Not too utilitarian or like functional view of this, of like what is objectively the best course to pair with law, but more for you, whoever anonymous attendee is, and for all of us, what is the thing that will be most meaningful for you to pair with law? So the classic combination is often an arts law for the reasons I said earlier, or a commerce law for the kind of like you learn a bit about business and you also learn about law, and that's, you know, a good combination to set you up. But there's some amazing people out there who have done things like science law, then go on to practice in, you know, bio, physics, parts of intellectual property, or engineering law is a really interesting combination and can create really interesting opportunities in some of the tech law spaces that I've been involved in. So I would be thinking about more what's going to make you happy, and more importantly, what's going to make you thrive so that you're succeeding in both your law degree and that other degree, not what is sort of objectively on paper the right combination.
If I can add to that too, Tom, my double degree was commerce, but I majored in industrial relations, and which was, I'm not sure if it's even available anymore, but it was a little bit of an unusual choice back then. There weren't many of us that chose that combination, but of course directly fed into the career that I now have, and it also fed into a job opportunity that I got while I was actually still at university. And I got to get really involved in that. So
and not to steal your role, Paul, but I'd be interested to hear from you. Was that an intentional decision? Did you do that other degree because you thought you wanted to be an employment lawyer, or just kind of interested you a little bit at the time and then it led to the career opportunities sort of in the other direction?
And that is a good question, Tom, because it was accidental. I didn't set out in my early studying years to become an employment lawyer. It's just something that I grew an interest in, probably not even when I was at school. Certainly I acquired it in the middle part of university, really. And I also, in my commerce degree, I wasn't interested in accounting. I wasn't interested in finance. I wasn't interested in economics and stats. So industrial relations also presented itself in that way as well, that sort of default, which you can't ignore. But it certainly opened up a whole world for me in terms of my career and the things that I do right now today. So so those choices were very important back then. Kushal, and what about you? What was with your double degree experience and your decision making?
Yeah, look, I have to agree with a lot of what, you know, Tom and Wen have said there about the double degree. Like I studied arts and I kind of just wanted to have I had an interest in politics, I had an interest in sort of international relations and criminology and things like that. And an arts degree was going to be able to add to those sorts of interest areas for me. One of my best mates from my old job, she, like Tom was mentioning, actually, she did science law. She actually had a career for a little while in, a more science-based thing. And those sorts of skills have come in really handy, even in legal practice. I think one common theme often, not always, but a common theme, even from what you've just described, Paul, and, even from the experiences of Tom and Wen, is that there's no linear or like orthodox path that everyone's always trying to search for this orthodox path towards where they're supposed to be. That like in year 12, I'll do law and then maybe I'll specialize in this kind of area. And then I'm going to become this amazing litigation lawyer. I'm going to be this amazing criminal lawyer. And that's going to be my career path. Whereas in reality, a lot of people who do study law, and from my experience and hearing a lot of different stories, including my own, is that you kind of build that path for you as you go along. That's one of the beauties, sometimes a scary part, but one of the beautiful things about doing a law degree is that you do build that path for yourself. So for me, I started in big law. I'm moving into a more of a community space right now. What the next step is could be a variety of different things. So I wouldn't put so much pressure in terms of what your other degree is going to be and what that will end up, influencing in the rest of your career, because you build that path for yourself anyway. So it's more about what you actually enjoy, what you think you'll be able to contribute to, and what you think you'll be able to learn from the most, because that's what you'll end up in a very explicit way, or maybe a softer way, you'll end up implementing later on down the track while you build that path. And you just have to really embrace the fact that you do build something for yourself. You aren't trying to as much, and we're always on that path of like, we want to try and find that orthodox path, the one that's like from this point to this point to this point to this point. In the modern world of practice, I just don't think that that's actually the common way to go. And it does mean that you'll end up having a lot of different opportunities. Sometimes you may not have actually expected to be in from when you were in high school, but you've embraced the skills that you've been able to get at university and beyond to build something that's niche and good for you and what you can contribute to.
I'd love to just build on that slightly, even for the rare person you come across who perhaps in year 12 or 11 knows they want to become X and they have a really strong concrete vision of that. The path there is still not going to be certain. That person would be foolish if they thought it would go A, B, C, D, E. And so if you are one of those people and you know you want to be the next great IP lawyer or whatever it might be, the best you can do is hold that vision, that guiding light really strongly and be super intentional about your next step. But everything else in between has to be reactive to what unfolds. And that's certainly true. To use him as another example, Brian always knew he wanted to be a criminal lawyer, but he had to get there through following opportunity and seeing what doors opened in the way that Kushal has described. So yeah, I would encourage people to be intentional about what's right in front of you and where you want to go in the future, but not over plan as Kushal says, the orthodox sort of route in between, because it just rarely happens like that. Sometimes does, and probably in a way that's not expected to the person when it does. So yeah, completely agree.
Can I add to what Kushal and Tom have said? So 2 points. One is you're never going to make a bad choice because it's not a once and for all decision. So you apply for a uni degree, you start it, you might like it, you might finish it. If you start it, you don't like it, you change, you do something else, you finish something else. The second thing is a university degree only helps you get your first job. No one in my career has asked me what my transcript was back in my undergraduate days for a long time. So really the decision you're making in year 12, putting your UAC preferences in should not be a daunting, oh my God, this is the rest of my life decision. It's more, what's my next step? And knowing that you could change it, your life could go on a more circuitous route, things might change. So you've got to embrace that uncertainty.
Now, I mentioned previously that while I was at university, I picked up a job in my chosen field in industrial relations. And yes, so I got a job as an industrial relations officer with the bread manufacturers in New South Wales, and did that throughout the last 2.5 years of my studies. But I also had jobs as simultaneously and earlier as a bartender, as a maitre d', as a cleaner, and various other jobs that got me through my days. And I think all of them contributed to who I am and the choices that were made throughout my life. Our other panel members, I mean, do you want to share, your feelings about working at university besides study and its role? Is it important, not so important, and what sort of things might the boys want to consider working at while they're there, if working is a good idea? Perhaps Tom, you go first on this one.
Cool. So I think the starting point here, and an important one that I've reflected on more and more in recent years as I've become a more mature member of society, is this question obviously is hugely related to your personal and family financial circumstances. And so there are people who at university will need to work, and Paul, you're describing, whether it's for having a beer with your mates on the weekend or because you needed to pay the rent to go to university, I don't know. And so if you need to work, you need to work. If that is not a factor, then I personally would discourage working for some sort of, again, utilitarian career advancement purposes, because there's so much else to interact with at university that I think will serve to broaden your horizons and ultimately advance your career in more interesting ways in the future. So just to be a little bit more specific on what I mean there, a lot of people think if I'm doing a law degree, I should get a paralegal job at a corporate law firm because that will help me become an actual lawyer when I graduate. The risk there is that you are doing a job that might not be that inspiring, you're doing something that's like broadly, narrowly in the same bucket as what you're studying at the university, which can have some great synergies and open up some interesting, like, oh, this is the case I read, and now I'm printing it off 1,000 times for my partner who's actually doing some interesting work on it. But for me, I think it would be more useful to your career in the way that Paul was describing, to think about what are the other spaces that I could interact with, either in a volunteer way or an extracurricular way or a job way, that might give me a diversity of experience and perspectives. And these days, you know, as someone who has hired people at Legal Vision, read a lot of resumes and done a lot of interviews in the past, they're the more interesting sort of things that people look for. Like, we'll look at your law degree and see that you've got one and see your marks, probably, particularly if it's early career, because that's what you got to go on. But then, you know, the fact that you engage with a certain interesting job that was a bit different to law will probably take up the first 10 minutes of the interview conversation in an unexpected way. So again, pursuing what is interesting to you and what you kind of want to use your time on is a better way to do it than saying, I should get a law job to continue being a lawyer.
Rather than getting
go on, Paul.
rather than getting Kushal and Wen to just follow straight on from that, and I just want to pick up on a couple of the questions. Firstly, in your careers, let's say as in the first stages, because I think all of us worked in big law fairly early on in our careers. What was your roughly working hours per week? Ballpark.
I mean, at my end, it varied quite a bit. So I was fortunate that if it wasn't particularly busy or like standard day to day, I could start at 9 and finish at, 5:30, 6 o'clock quite easily.
So at Baker and McKenzie, you had a bit of work-life balance.
Yeah, which was actually like, I one of the things, like, even leaving Baker's, I actually really enjoyed, why I'm also very passionate about work environment as well, is that I'll be honest, I was in a disputes team and that's where I settled. And, between the months of like March to July or something like that, we were working some serious hours because we were on back-to-back Supreme Court cases that were on like a very urgent nature. And, when push comes to shove in those environments, you've got to do what you've got to do, and those you're pulling very late hours, quite late into the night. For me, it was really important, though, in the sense that I knew that was going to be for a sustained period and I could see the reason why it needed to happen. For me, my day-to-day wasn't actually so bad, where it was like 9 to about 5:30, 6 o'clock on your everyday sort of stuff. But there wasn't a pressure to be like, you must be showing your face to be staying at the office and, be seen to be there. There was a bit of a trust there. And I think that kind of balance is actually really important to me, because it meant that you could really put in the hours when you knew they were necessary.
And what about you, Wen? I mean, particularly in the early days at the law firm,
it was an interesting experience because I started my law career during the GFC, and so
that's the global financial crisis for those younger members of the
for those young people. So about 2009, when all the banks in the US crashed, and there was a period where it was quite quiet. In fact, they delayed my start date by 2 months just because the firms didn't have enough work at the time. When things were busy, I would say, we'd be working around the clock, but then there would also be quiet moments between 9, 6, 9, 5, 9, 6. So it did vary. At the end of the day, I mean, people, if you're going to a legal career, especially a corporate legal career, there is an expectation that there will be times where you have to work quite hard. And working hard is probably 1 or 2 levels of intensity above where you would be if you're studying at school. But that comes with the territory. And secondly, it's not mandatory in the sense that no one is asking you have to do a corporate law job. People leave corporate law jobs and do other jobs with less demanding hours all the time. And that doesn't make you a lesser lawyer.
Yeah. We've got another interesting question. I don't know if people can compare in University of Sydney, where they have 2 semesters a year, University of New South Wales 3 semesters a year. Do people think that makes any difference about the way you'd studied and the way you'd choose a university or the outcomes?
I taught term 1 at UNSW with a 10-week course. It was a little bit more compact in the sense that they were trying to cram, I think, 12 weeks of content into 10 weeks. But at the same time, because it's trimesters, I think you do fewer units per trimester than you would in a 2-semester program. Alternatively, if you cram it in, you can graduate earlier. So it really, at the end of the day, depends on the person.
Yeah. Kushal, maybe this is one for you. Have you, the LAT for University of New South Wales, have you, I'm gathering it's obviously quite a recent development. University of Sydney does not have an equivalent based on my research. What do you know about LAT and what you can share with our audience?
Yeah, so a couple of things that it came up, that came about, I think, a year or two after I started law school, but I was a UNSW law ambassador and we had to talk quite extensively about what the LAT is and what we had to, what students are required to do. There's a couple of things that I'd recommend. One is attending all the UNSW seminars and info evenings about the LAT in particular. And the second thing is about, I know this happens for UMAT, for medicine and that sort of thing. I would highly recommend not going to active tutoring agencies or people who are saying they're going to coach the LAT. Having seen the way that it's designed and the way that it's progressed, the whole idea is that you are responding to a question that you don't actually prepare for, but responding to a question that you are preparing your critical thinking, trying to write critically to a question that might be put to you. Nothing where you need active pre-knowledge on, you don't actually need to have a massive amount of knowledge on anything in particular for that test, but it is about how you respond to it on the day. I think there's a lot of businesses that, at least when it started coming up being we'll tutor you for this, with quite poor results. And it's just my warning, I suppose, to a lot of students who may feel comforted by the fact that an agency might exist, to tread very cautiously, just because it is designed in a way that is meant to be obviously as an additional element to try and help you get into law school, but it is not designed to be something that you're actually tutored for. So you don't actually need to prepare that much for it.
Yeah. In the final 4 or 5 minutes that we've got left, can I go to each of you, maybe start off with, again, back with you, Tom, with any achievements or things that you're still yet to achieve, summed up in say about a minute, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I've just also seen the question here from an attendee. Can you share some highlights and lowlights with 5 minutes left? Perfect timing on that one. I guess, as we all do, I'm living pretty much in the current recent past in answering this question, but over the last year I've started my own business, which, as I said, is a kind of quasi-legal technology platform that's helping consumers and businesses resolve complaints with a focus on customer complaints in banking, telco, and energy, sort of essential services. And it's been an amazing experience. I didn't kind of expect the amount that I would learn going on this challenge. Recently have raised investment capital, so in external financing for the business, which has kind of taken it to just something that has been my risk to now other people who that wearing the pressure of them having put some money in as well, which takes it to a whole new level of reality. So that's been an exciting achievement, but obviously also just represents the start of the story. So when you say anything else I'm keen to achieve, the main thing for a startup like this is just having a genuine and intellectually honest crack at seeing if there's something there, using those funds that I've been entrusted with in a disciplined and efficient and wise way and respectful way. And, hopefully in a few years being able to talk at this again and talk about my business that maybe more of you might actually know about. And maybe I've even helped you get out of some problems with Telstra or, Energy Australia or CBA or whoever it may be.
We have to make sure everyone at least follows you on LinkedIn. So that's the absolute minimum, hey?
For sure. That'd be great.
And when, what about you?
I recently celebrated my 5th birthday as a barrister. So that's 5 years of coming out on my own as a sole trader, with my own legal practice. It's over the initial hurdle, so I'm happy, things are still going along. I also recently went on an overseas advocacy training course in Oxford, which was the first time I've been to that university. It was an amazing experience. But at the same time, in my, I would say, 12, 13-year legal career, I've had many lowlights. I've stuffed up many times, made many mistakes, made many law firm partners very unhappy with my performance. I'm sure there are, even earlier this year, a judge got really angry at me at a hearing. Your CV of failures will be, very long over the course of your career. And, two things, you will learn from the mistakes. Everybody makes them. And secondly, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's what those mistakes and what the lessons you've learned turn you into a better, legal professional, a better human being. And people only see the highlights, but they don't see that behind the highlights there are a lot of failures along the way, a lot of missteps, and that's okay. That's just life.
Yeah, good on you. And Kushal, what about you?
I think broadly, I'm still very much a baby lawyer at this point in my career, but I think for me, the things in terms of achievements, what I'm happy is to try and keep up with a lot of the stuff that doesn't necessarily happen during your day job. So for example, with the Film Council, and recently started as co-chair of the Australian India Business Council's youth chapter, and different things that kind of keep you energized in different parts of the world as well, like just diversity advocacy and those sorts of things are all important to me. And I think what Tom was talking about is that there's just so much happening and there's so many different things that you can get involved with, that's where I kind of get my energy from, where you can actually see broader impacts and things like that. And so law is part of that, but it's not, my only love in that regard. And I think that, in terms of things that I'd like to hopefully one day be able to achieve is to kind of continue doing that, but on a broader level. And, things including, policy and politics have also been of interest as a result. Obviously that's its own beast. And, something that I'm still kind of looking in from the outside going, is that a path to tread down or not? But I also think that it's in line with that. There's a lot of broad things that you can kind of get involved in and hopefully have that broader impact as well. So there's a lot of different things that I'm still figuring out for myself. But if it's any consolation to a lot of people in the audience as well, is that, I'm, a couple of years out from a law degree now and still on that path, figuring it out, but happily doing so. And, it's okay to be figuring that out step by step and still be happy with what you're doing.
Yeah. And I share the fact that I think that when I went out in practice on my own in 2014, that was a huge step, but one that I'll regard as an achievement because it was life-changing in a really positive way. Really scary, but it turned out to be just the best decision I could have made, both in lifestyle and in terms of career achievement. It was great. And then the other thing, with some of the pro bono work that I do, not just in the Sydney High community with the Sydney High Foundation and the Old Boys Union, but I also pick other pro bono work, and I'm currently a pro bono lawyer for the Song Company. I try to pick a cause that I like to attach to and do some work like that. So and that keeps me going and keeps me sane, I must say. We have to wrap it up now. Max, can I just ask you to sort of talk about the next couple of sessions? But before you do that, I just want to say from my perspective, big thanks to Tom and to Wen and to Kushal. It's been fabulous talking to you and getting to know you a lot better. And I really hope, boys at Sydney Boys High and your parents and families that might be listening, I hope you got something out of this today. I've enjoyed doing this, and good luck in the next stage of your career. So thank you. Over to you, Max.
And also I want to say thank you to you, Paul, for leading the discussion and the panel, and likewise a huge thank you to Wen, Tom, and Kushal. Thank you also to all the attendees, obviously, to joining and asking some interesting questions. I think that got some good responses, and some educational for me too. I know we're over time, so the main thing to remind the attendees is there's 2 more sessions on this week. So tomorrow, same time at 4:30, we're going to have a banking session, and on Thursday at 5 o'clock start, so slightly later start than all the other sessions so far, a session on the public sector, including which will be moderated by Andrew Hay, who's a councillor in the Randwick Council. So that will be an interesting interesting perspective too. So please do join. Please do. So that the turnout today was a little bit lower than the sessions we had last week. So I'm not sure if there was some events on or not, but please do remind your friends and other if there are any parents on there or not, remind the other parents in the chat groups and the like that the sessions are on. So tomorrow 4:30 banking and Thursday 5 o'clock public sector. Again, thank you very much, and good luck for the Year 12s who are about to get onto the HSC. Okay. Bye everyone.